Governor Braun, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
You are about 2 months into your term as the governor of Indiana. How would you assess things going so far?
I came from the world of running a small business that turned into a regional, then national company. Did that for 37 years before I was sworn in as senator. So that was my real career. And 3 years in the state legislature and 6 years out there as a very involved freshman Senate office that got all kinds of stuff done. I would say coming back here, setting the agenda, takes me back to my earlier roots. And that combination of real world experience there, along with 3 years in the state legislature, where you really learn the process of making law, having to get along with the executive branch, and doing it in a much more difficult place like the U.S. Senate, putting a great team together. We've gotten a lot done. Our agenda is pretty well unfolding in areas that most governors wouldn't touch, reforming healthcare. We've got some of the poorest stats in the country with high costs and poor outcomes, and that's taking a big sector of our economy that doesn't want to change. And we're getting some stuff done. You'll see it. Education, which is half our budget, K through 12, another 15%. What we do to support post-secondary public schools, colleges and universities, a lot of legislation there. Streamlining government probably could go down as a legacy as being the biggest thing we will have gotten accomplished. And we took a sprawling organizational chart, reorganized it into 8 entrepreneurial policy silos, and put really good people there that are going to be able to feed me directly all the things about how you lean it up, how you do it better. So I'd say all in all, feel real good about where we are.
Let's talk about one of the things that you really drove your campaign on, and that was the issue of property tax relief for homeowners. The Senate, though, Senate Bill 1 essentially gutted a lot of your proposal, not completely, but to the point where you weren't necessarily happy what passed out of the Senate onto the House. Where do we stand today in the efforts, in your mind, of getting this back to what you see as an acceptable level?
Well, you should have been with me about an hour and a half ago when I addressed a full upstairs of disappointed taxpayers that occurred. When I ran, the thing I heard literally nonstop through 23, I declared, and if you remember December of 22, that built into a crescendo that was so loud by election November of 24 that I don't know how you could have missed it. Very simple. It is a formula that applies a tax rate to assessed values. Assessed values, since they were stable till inflation was unleashed by a borrow and spend federal government over the prior 4 years before Trump got in there, locals had the ability through an opaque system not to take tax rates down to a level that would have covered their costs and given them a growth quotient that most would think reasonable. Obviously, they would talk about, well, I kept taxes the same. No, the bills went way up in many cases, above and beyond the 25 to 30% that would have covered legitimate increases. We'll land the plane in a place that is going to be enough for them to have covered that, but not to have the windfall that many received because they weren't respecting their own taxpayer.
Do you feel like the House is moving this legislation along at a pace that you'll be happy with the ultimate outcome?
This will be the last thing that gets conferenced, finished up in mid-April. But if you would have been there today at the taxpayer rally in our own state capitol, I've never seen one like it. I never had a campaign rally like it. It's what I campaigned on. So I think if local governments, school districts, which I'm on record, I want them to be healthy. It's the most important part of the public arena, even more important than probably state government, especially the federal government, in terms of how it impacts us on a daily basis, respect your taxpayer. Don't grow government faster than the taxpayer's ability to pay for it. Listen to them. I'll be their earpiece, and we'll, I think, win the discussion. If it doesn't all get fleshed out, I've got other options, but I do believe they know we're not trying to do anything other than keep them healthy, cover their real costs, but where they went overboard, they're going to have to reset it to where the taxpayer can see that we haven't been turning a deaf ear to it.
As you have likely heard from some of the Republicans who gave some level of pushback, especially in the Senate, that essentially their fear is you're trading a property tax cut for a separate sort of a tax increase someplace along the line to make up for the revenue that's lost. Is it a situation where you're taking out of your left pocket and put it in
we
the
don't
right?
want them to lose any revenue other than the revenue that they took from taxpayers that wasn't needed to keep them healthy. So with any jurisdiction, they're never, even if they got by with it, wanting to give back. But they through, and this isn't all of them, some were respectful to where they didn't raise their tax revenues above and beyond what they legitimately needed.
So you
And
feel as though, pardon me, you feel as though that your tax plan moving forward, at least as it stands today, has the ability to bring about the type of relief you'd like to see without additional taxes having to be tacked on at the local level.
yes, I think here we're just asking them to acknowledge that they have record cash balances in many cases, already some shiny objects that they've spent money on. That'll be more difficult because they've already spent it, at least in the cases where they're sitting on, a lot of cash reserves. They're not going to be impacted much at all. So
So
this
speaking
again,
frankly, I was going to say, so speaking frankly with this, you're essentially telling the locals that they need to perhaps look at cutting some programs or some level of other spending to make up for what you see is relief that's
if
needed.
they've gone way above the baseline of where they would have been in 21, and if they've gone way above covering that baseline at a reasonable growth rate of, say, 3%, and if they've covered their inflationary costs, all the rest is where they've overtaxed their own citizens in those jurisdictions. We need to find a reasonable compromise that gives setback to those bills 25, 26. And for the ones that really overdid it, you shouldn't expect, well, now all of a sudden you can start reining things in going forward. You're going to have to be entertaining a little bit of it going back to the taxpayer. That's simple.
Last question on the property tax issue, and that's you mentioned the tax assessments. In some counties, we have seen for some people complaining about exploding tax assessments. Does your bill do anything about the rate at the level at which tax assessments can grow?
That's where the confusion is. You can't look at just assessments or tax rates. You got to look at the tax bills or the levies. The levies end up dictating what your bill is. And assessed values going up without doing the arithmetic to take down your tax rates to be reasonable, that's what occurred. So when it comes to assessed values, they went up legitimately in many cases because it's based on a market underlying it. Then the part of algebra that you didn't do was lower the tax rate to keep the bills down. So capping it going forward is looking at the bill or the levy, which are very similar, not assessed values or rates individually. It's the bill that ends up being the combination of the two.
So if Senate Bill 1 is property taxes, Senate Bill 2 is about the issue of Medicaid. It's no secret that the explosion of Medicaid has been seen in Indiana, other states as well, and how much the states are paying out, sometimes way beyond the rate of inflation. With some of this work that's happening in the legislature and some of your own executive orders, are you in a position that you can state that the state government is in the process of making sure that there are people currently on Medicaid who believe to be there and should be there will remain on there, and the people who are not on there but perhaps qualify still will be able to get on?
So anyone that's on there because they've not reported correctly, their real income levels, any of the fraud and waste. We're going to find all of that. The biggest issue is we're dealing with a business partner, the federal government, that doesn't pay much attention to any of what I just mentioned there. Even though they pay the preponderance of it, our share can be uncontrollable because they don't watch how the thing is being run. And the real solution to this is reforming healthcare, hospitals, insurance companies, making it to where it's more market driven, to where you're going to enforce competition and transparency. Because even like in our own largest healthcare system, IU Health, 10 years ago, their payor from the federal government for Medicaid and Medicare was way under 50%. Now it's approaching 60%, if not exceeding it. So we got to reform the providers, which we're going to be the loudest state government on doing it. All kinds of bills asking you to be transparent, competitive, get rid of the barriers to entry, or you'll be part of a one-payer system that I think most people would regret. We're migrating that way year after year into more Medicaid, more Medicare. Both of them get reimbursed at a lot lower level than private insurance. So you're getting a lot of people that provide private insurance fed up with it. We can't be subsidizing through private insurance the inefficiencies and other things, even though Medicare and Medicaid going to be less than what private insurance costs. There's a lot of confusion there. Reform the underlying industry. Insurance is going to have to be a totally different thing in the future than what it is. It's purely an administrative cost. Pharma does a pretty good job on making the pill. Then they got a thing called a PBM. So there's all kinds of things that restrict the market. If you want to be a market, act like it. Be transparent, compete. That helps the whole system, but we're still tied at the hip through Medicaid with the federal government. It's got its own issues.
What happens if the federal government doesn't handle this issue in your mind correctly? What happens to the state budget?
Well, I think for healthcare, I'm a believer that everyone should have it. It should be accessible. We just need to lower the costs. We're in the worst of both worlds. It runs like an unregulated utility. It's got a heavy involvement with the federal government, and they run things so poorly that they're borrowing $1 trillion every 6 months now. When I got there 6 years ago, it was annually. So they don't do anything efficiently. That's what DOGE is about. States are going to probably have to be doing more independent of the federal government and take on that responsibility, because what they get involved with is generally not going to be good value. Ironically, what they do through Medicare and Medicaid is a better value than the private side. That's how convoluted it is.
What about you mentioned DOGE? What about the iDoge, the Indiana version of Department of Government Efficiency? And this somewhat goes into the approach anyway of what you were talking about with Medicaid, making sure that the people specifically are vetted through properly. Will the approach of the state government for DOGE be similar to what we've seen with the federal government? And of course, as there's a lot of talk about the possibility of chainsaws versus scalpels.
No, we don't need that, because we've got what they don't have. We've got a balanced budget, it's in our Constitution. We've also got non-career politicians running it, supervising our state agencies. That's a blessing, because most people in our state government, many of them run a business. We've got structurally good cash flow. That doesn't mean there's not room for sprucing up. And with my coming in as a governor that signed the front side of a paycheck, we don't even get that very often. We hardly have any of it in the U.S. Senate. Now we're going to have the blessing of someone that's run an enterprise, is going to know how to keep it intact, make it better, and maybe leaning it up at the same time. That's my goal. We're already finding a lot of areas in just 2 months where we can do it better with less. That's true value to the taxpayers.
Part of the DOGE approach on the federal side, in fact, we're talking about that right now, and that is the potential elimination of the Department of Education on the federal level. If that in fact happens, and it appears as though we're moving at least in that direction,
Yep.
potentially with congressional action, of course, is the state of Indiana prepared to step up and take over some of the functions that the federal Department of Education had been doing, and maybe successfully?
That's a fairly small part of our budget, money we get from them. So yes, there's a thing called the 10th Amendment that was never crafted to be part of the federal government's responsibility. And the fact that we've gone from the time Reagan cut taxes without watching spending in the 80s to where our national debt was so much smaller than what it would be now. I mean, in just a few $1 trillion probably, they are going to have to do less. That's why the chainsaw, I don't like it, because you still should probably do it with some, it has to be orderly. Took a long time to build up to it, but better that than just keep doing what we were doing for the 6 years I was there. So Department of Education, a lot of the other arenas of the federal government were never intended to be there, and we'll gradually have to take more of that back to the states, because we'll find a way to do it better and for less cost per unit. We're at the very beginning stage of it, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. I was there, talked about it a lot for 6 years. I describe it as talking to the side of my barn, because it never really resonated. Now it is. And I do want to make sure that we're careful so that we don't lose the American public because they think we are taking too drastic approach. But it needs to be closer to drastic than incremental, because it is at a crisis state, borrowing $2 trillion a year.
I want to be aware of your time, of course. I do have a couple more real quick questions. One of them is
Okay.
regard to the executive orders, specifically that you signed about transgendered women, biological men competing in women's sports in the high school level,
Yes.
especially. That has been signed. That is currently the case for the Indiana High School Athletic Association. The state of Iowa took that a step further and talked about potentially, some would say, limiting transgender civil rights, essentially removing gender identity as a protected class. Do you think Indiana would go to that level as well? Do you think Iowa went too far?
We were making a statement there that everyone had gone too far, and that's like an 80% polling. I think even among Democrats, it's close to 65 to 70%. Republicans, nearly 100, and independents, somewhere in between. That's what we did there. And you can see that that's falling apart. Even the Supreme Court, when it comes to trying to contrive outcomes, it's different now. And at the federal level, a lot of that was forced onto the states, even as a quid pro quo for a lot of the funding that came through the Biden administration. So what happens further down the road? I'm picking the low-hanging fruit here, in the sense that it was so obvious that that needed to change. And we're there now. What other states do, we'll watch with interest. We're just trying to do some of the things that make easy sense, because it did not make sense the other way.
But just to wrap up that particular question, can you tell the people in the LGBTQ community, especially the T part of that community, that they don't have to
I've
worry
already
about
met with them and told them, when it comes to demonizing their point of view, any prejudice, bigotry, I'm not going to tolerate any of that. We even got into the discussion of bullying, which comes along with it. There's no place for that. I told
that
them we're
goes
gonna
to
have-
legal protections as well. That goes for legal protections as well.
I said it comes to the conversation that we're going to have. We did that one thing. Don't extrapolate that into more.
Okay. One of two final questions for you. One is related to road funding. Of course, that's always a big issue in every state in the country, especially Indiana with our love of potholes, or lack thereof. One of the pieces of legislation right now is actually from a local Republican, Jim Pressel, who would like to essentially some would say force counties and local entities to have a wheel tax to get full matching funds through the community crossroads. Do you support essentially forcing local communities, towns, counties to have a wheel tax maximized at its full level in order to get the full matching grant?
So here I go back to the 3 years I was in the legislature, 15, 16, and 17. I think we did community crossings in 16. I can't tell you the number of calls I get from mayors and commissioners. What are you talking about? We got to pay for part of this. It is now the most popular infrastructure program we've ever had. It's called Skin in the Game. I was a co-author of the road funding bill. And when we got mostly industrial and commercial folks bought into, if you're spending it on roads and bridges, that's a user fee. That's how we put a lot of our improvements into place. But we have no funding currently that would do new road and bridge projects above and beyond the ones that we had on the slate back then. So if you want better roads and bridges, not to mention other forms of infrastructure, we got to figure out how to pay for it. So I think Representative Pressel's putting a template out there. So we as a Crossroads of America, our main and only single advantage that we have probably vis-a-vis other 49 states, we got to make sure we fund it properly. And when it comes to how you pay for it, don't ask for something if you're not willing to put skin in the game yourself. And to me, a wheel tax kind of would speak from that. Most do it. Everybody loves community crossings. We've added more to it. And I think if you want more for infrastructure, realize that you got to put your fair share into it as well.
And the secondary part of that bill allows for more tolling of highways in the state of Indiana. Are you willing to add more toll highways?
So when it comes to the highway that is used most, probably, it's used 70% roughly by people that don't even stop to eat or fuel, that's Highway 70. So being the intersection of interstates, being the Crossroads of America, we got to make sure that people outside our state that use it are paying for some of that. We haven't to date. So I'm going to look to see what makes sense there. If you don't consider it as a user fee for new construction, well, we'll be filling potholes and probably not building much new.
So it sounds like you're strongly considering the possibility, at least for
I'm
highway
going to be
70.
open to the argument of what it takes to make sure we keep our roads and bridges in safe, healthy conditions and that we plan for the future. I'm not saying what it'll be. I'm saying we've run out of whatever we did in 17 because it's only good for maintaining what we've got and completing a few projects that we knew about. It doesn't account for anything else new. I'll let Hoosiers, the folks impacted by it, I listen well. I'm going to see what the rest of the state is interested in doing. But I do believe in skin in the game.
Final question for you, and that is the lawmakers have essentially killed off a possibility of some level of marijuana legalization. Are you concerned that this potential significant sort of source of revenue has been left off the table, or are you okay with that approach? Of course, Indiana is the only one in this general area. Every neighboring state has some level of legalized marijuana.
And I think now we're surrounded by 3 states that do it recreationally. I think Ohio just came on board. I'm not certain of that, but I believe all 4 do it for medical purposes. So you can look to see what's happened in the last 15 years. It's, I think, up to 37 states got it one way or the other. When you're surrounded by it, people are going to be leaving the state to probably satisfy their demand. I'm going to listen carefully to law enforcement. They have to put up with the repercussions of something that may need to be regulated and that gets legalized if it makes sense, or the issues with it coming in from across state borders where you're probably committing a crime to do it. So yeah, that's an interesting topic. I'm publicly out there that medical marijuana is something we got to look at. We'll see what happens on the recreational side, and that surely will be another sequence of bills next year that take us closer to seeing what we're going to do now that we're surrounded by 4 states.
All right, Governor Braun, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
You bet.
Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe to the WSBT 22 YouTube channel.